I like it dark. I like books that are upsetting, that make me uncomfortable when reading them. The kind of book that is so troubling you almost want to put it down, but then there's something inside of you, some reckless curiosity that is stronger than your aversions, and it compels you to keep going. That's the kind of books I like, disturbing books. Now, books can be disturbing for a variety of reasons. So for this video, I have created 5 categories of disturbing books, and for each category, I have selected 2 books to talk about. I'm not necessarily recommending these books. I'm going to tell you about them, describe my experience when reading them, and whether you should read them or not, you will draw your own conclusions. As per usual on this channel, there will be a combination of literary and horror, classics and contemporary. If that sounds like your bag, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. It really does help the channel, and I appreciate the support. Now I'll run a short intro sequence featuring the music of John Adams, and I'll see you on the other side to talk about disturbing books. The first category of disturbing books is mental illness. The 2 books I want to tell you about are both first-person narrations from someone suffering from mental illness. And the first book is The Drowning Girl by Caitlin R. Kiernan from 2012. Now, The Drowning Girl won the Bram Stoker Award for Best Horror Novel of the Year in 2013, but I would not consider it a horror book. In The Drowning Girl, a young woman suffering from schizophrenia or some similar form of mental illness, she keeps a diary wherein she wants to tell us about an encounter she had with a ghost. A young girl came to stay with her, a young girl that she claims was a ghost. Now, as the story goes on, her mental state deteriorates, as does the narration, as does the writing, to an extent that at the end it's just a string of indecipherable stream of consciousness. It seems like it would be a very fun book to write. It was a fun book to read as well, disturbing, but fun, ultimately, for me. Depending on your sensibilities, The Drowning Girl is probably the tamest of the books I'm going to talk about, the most accessible. So if you're looking to ease your way into disturbing books, The Drowning Girl might be a good place to start. The next book is Spider by Patrick McGrath from 1990. Spider is also a first-person narration from a man suffering from schizophrenia. He was just released from the hospital for the criminally insane, and he was released into a halfway house that is located in the neighborhood he grew up in, a neighborhood on the outskirts of London. So he keeps a journal, and he walks around his neighborhood trying to piece back together his memories and come to terms with who he is and with the crime he committed. Spider is a vivid and intimate look into a troubled mind. There's a fascinating read, and for me, also especially emotionally unsettling. There is a movie adaptation as well, a movie made by David Cronenberg starring Ralph Fiennes. I really liked the movie, but for me the book was even more intimate and ultimately more engaging and more troubling as well. The next category I've titled That Which Shall Not Be Named. Not because YouTube is going to demonetize this video. I don't make money on YouTube, just because I don't want to say the words out loud. But you'll understand what I'm talking about once I describe the books. The first book is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov from 1955. Lolita is the first-person account of a man who kidnaps and abuses young girls. It is disgusting and appalling, albeit expertly crafted as a story. Lolita is an excellent example of the unreliable narrator, one who forces us to read between the lines in order for us to understand who he truly is and what he has truly done. The narration is a confession of sorts, wherein the narrator tries to justify his acts by minimizing them and shifting away the blame as well. The next book in the category of that which shall not be named is The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane by Laird Koenig from 1974. Now this is not as literary perhaps as Lolita is in its ambition. It's more of a pulp mystery thriller. A young girl, I think she's 12 or 13-year-old girl, and her father, they rent a house in New England, or a small town in the United States. The owner of the house, the landlord, she's excited to have them as her tenants because the father, he is a famous writer, so she thinks it's prestigious to have them as her tenants. So they sign the contracts and they pay the deposit, pay the rent, what have you. As time goes by, a little while later, the landlord, she comes back to check up on them, but the father is either he's off on an errand or he's in bed sick, so he's not available. So she returns a few weeks later, a few days later, and again, the father is off on an errand or he's sick in bed. And as time goes by, every time the landlord comes by with some fabricated reason to check up on them, the father is never around. Something just isn't right about this. Furthermore, the landlord, she has a son. He's an older man. He's in his 30s, late 30s probably, early 40s. And this son of hers, he is not a good guy. The landlord, she knows this, but what can she do? He's her son, right? Just try to keep him out of trouble, I guess. That's all I will tell you about the plot. There's a mystery aspect to it. But then once you find out what is really happening, it's not a book you can unread, which I suppose is true for all books. But you understand my meaning. Moving on, the next category I'm calling societal depravity. This is where the ugliness doesn't necessarily come from an individual, but rather the ugliness has been accepted and thus propagated by society at large. Institutionalized cruelty, systemic racism, that sort of thing. And the first book on this list is Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee from 1999. Disgrace won the Booker Prize for Best Novel of the Year, as well as many other awards. Coetzee is a South African author, and this book is set in South Africa, and boy, does it make South Africa look like a grim place to live. The women in this book are treated with little more dignity and agency than a base animal, and the ugliness is so pervasive, culturally pervasive, that there is a sort of resignation, almost a shrug and a sigh from the characters. A resignation that is just soul-crushing. It is not a feel-good story, but it is a disturbing one. The next book in the category of societal depravity is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison from 1970. This was Toni Morrison's first book. It's a powerful book, which tells the stories of young, poor black girls and black women from generation to generation in the United States. It explores the concept of beauty, especially how it is perceived by young, poor black girls and black women in the U.S., and how an unrealistic ideal is imposed on them culturally, psychologically, and what those ramifications are. There is a systematic and systemic injustice portrayed in this book, one that is propagated from generation to generation, using the concept of beauty to dehumanize and subjugate an entire people. Now, the prose is gorgeous in this book, even if the subject matter is quite dark. Toni Morrison doesn't pull any punches here. She creates vivid, unique, well-fleshed out characters that appear real and lived in, and then she brutalizes them mercilessly. But she does so with incredible literary skill and style. It's a very powerful book and a very disturbing one as well. The next category is similar, but I'm calling it Mob Rules because I'm a huge Black Sabbath fan. This is where the disturbing comes when people get together and someone's dark impulse is then given accomplice. Groupthink sets in and then it snowballs. The first book in this category is Beneath the Lion's Gaze by Maaza Mengiste from 2010. Maaza Mengiste is an Ethiopian writer, and this book is set in Ethiopia in the 1970s. During an extreme famine, a communist revolution backed by the Soviet Union sweeps through the country. They assassinate their leader, Emperor Selassie. They install a military regime that turns young men into young soldiers. The book focuses on one family in particular, a family that is already in mourning due to the passing of the matriarch. The father, he has two sons. One son is a student who gets involved with counter-revolutionary protests. And the father, he works in a hospital. He's the director of a hospital that is taken over by the soldiers and where they bring in the results of their torture. It's a gruesome book. The father, he is afraid for his son because the soldiers, they don't take kindly to student protesters. So the father, he wants to keep the family safe, but the son, he wants to fight for his country. So it's a case where both parties have noble motivations, but which lead to contradictory actions or inaction. It's a gruesome book where people do unspeakable things to their fellow countrymen and women. When an ideal is held above all else, everything is permitted, and in consequence, everything is done, including the dark and the otherwise unimaginable. The second book in this category is from the famous Peruvian author Mario Vargas Llosa, and that is Los Cachorros from 1967. Now, this was translated into English. However, the title of the translation is ridiculous. It is called The Cubs, which for me, cubs are cute, cuddly animals. Los cachorros are technically, it's a group of young mammals or adepts of an ideal or of a membership to a certain way of thinking or way of life. But cachorros is also wild dogs, which is important to the story. I think that a better translation would have been the pack, but they went with the cubs. I'm going to continue to call it Los Cachorros, but there is an English translation available. Anyway, Los Cachorros takes place in Lima, the capital of Peru, and it centers around a group of young boys, 12, 13 years old, group of friends at a Catholic boarding school for boys. They want to be on the football team, so they're out practicing football or soccer, and when they are attacked by a wild dog, they try to capture or trap the dog in their locker rooms, except that goes very badly. One of the young boys is mauled pretty badly. He has his genitals mutilated. And from there, this book explores how this group of friends, how they go from boyhood to adulthood in the machismo environment of Lima in the 1960s, where to become a man involves certain rites of passage, involving chasing women, courting women, sexual conquests, and that sort of thing. Except one of these boys had his genitals ripped off. It's quite an interesting examination of going from boyhood to adulthood. It's also interesting in the style in which it's written. It's a bit experimental in that the perspectives, the third person narrator, and the perspectives of the individual characters all blend together in a sense, where one character's thoughts bleed into another character's thoughts in almost a stream of consciousness style. It makes for a compelling and interesting read, and a gruesome and disturbing story as well. Up to now, all the books I've talked about have been more of a literary variety. So the final category is horror. And the first book in this category is Off Season by Jack Ketchum from 1980. Now, I talked about Off Season in my video of the scariest books ever. I talked about it in depth there. So here I'll just tell you that it's his first book. It is a home invasion story wherein a group of friends rent out a house in a coastal town in New England, and they are attacked by a clan of inbred cannibals. Gruesome and gory. There are no punches held. It's vivid and realistic. There are no supernatural elements to separate you from the world, from that story. It was a tough read for me. And the second book in this category is not too dissimilar from Off Season, but it was a different experience for me as a reader. And that book is Brother by Anya Alborn from 2015. A family in Appalachia, they kidnap young women and keep them in their cellar to torture and kill. Brother focuses on one of the brothers of the family who begins to question the family's peculiar traditions. He meets a young woman in town, and he is smitten with her. and he does not want to take her home to meet the family. He does not want her to know the monster that he is. And while this book is gruesome and vivid, realistic, bloody, much like Off-Season, what separates it is it also manages to have heart. The brother, we get insight into his character, and he's, in a way, a victim also. It makes for a compelling story, albeit a very disturbing one. So there it is. I managed to make it through the 10 most disturbing books I've ever read. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked the video. If so, like, subscribe, and comment. It's the best way to express that. I am going to take a shower and play with my cat. I'll see you at the next video.